Holler. We are doing plant structure and function, function and structure, plant structure and function. Woo. All right, let's do it. All right, let me share my screen. Oops. Come on, screen, let's do it. All right, plant structure and function coming at you. Chapters 35 and 36. Mr. Anderson has some good info as well. So remember that, I think we already talked about this. Yeah, we already talked about how algae is the ancestor to land plants, right? And if we look at algae, again, it's supported completely by water. The whole algae is photosynthetic and it has a holdfast instead of roots. Plants have what I kind of call shoots and roots. All right. So they have leaves that are photosynthetic, a waxy cuticle to prevent water loss. They have these stems for transport of materials and those roots for absorption. And remember, in the roots, we also have Mycorrhizae, don't know if I spelled that right, which is a symbiotic mutualistic relationship between plant roots and fungi. All right. So if we look at the development of these shoots and roots, that was a huge evolutionary development from as we went from algae to land plants, right? So we needed, or the plants had evolutionary adaptations that increased photosynthesis. Right? So increased photosynthesis by growing those plants higher and higher so they had more access to that sun. Oh, my dog, good Lord. And also that, Kenai, hold on, let me pause this. Ay. Kenai, enough. What's going on? What's going on, baby? What is it? What is it? You're gone. All done. All done. All done. Sorry about that. So evolutionary adaptations also included roots. So that helped the plant absorb minerals and, really importantly, water, because they're not in this fully aquatic environment anymore. Right. So just as a reminder, ferns, or those pterophytes, their big evolutionary adaptation was the appearance of vascular tissue, and that's in the forms of roots, xylem and phloem. Gymnosperms had the evolutionary adaptation of seeds. And again, remember, we went from spores, which were in moss and ferns, into seeds. And then angiosperms, which are the flowering plants. That's where we got the evolution of the flowers and fruits, which had co-evolution with their pollinators, right? So if we look at angiosperms, which again is by far the largest majority of plants on planet Earth, they can be further kind of characterized by being either monocots or dicots. And I'll kind of show you these. So a monocot is what it stands for is one seed leaf, right? And what that is really called a cotyledon. All right? Dicot has two seed leaves, or two cotyledons, all right? And so if you look at a monocot, their embryos are fundamentally different, right? Either by having one seed leaf or two. In a monocot, the veins on the leaves are parallel, whereas on the veins of a leaf on a dicot are kind of net-like. If you look at their stems and you kind of cut them in two, the monocot has kind of vascular bundles, which are these like little vascular bundles, which have kind of this complex arrangement, whereas the vascular tissue in a dicot has a ring, right? The roots in a monocot are usually fibrous versus a root in a dicot, which is a tap root, which has kind of a very kind of strong root with these fibers off of it. And then importantly, for their flowering parts, monocots usually have multiples of 3, right? If you look at the petals, for example, for the flowers in a dicot, they're usually multiples of 4 or 5. Right. So one of the things at some point I'll ask you to do is to go outside and take pictures of either monocots and or dicots. All right. So plant organization, or plants have 3 main types of organs. All right. And yeah, it's weird to think of plants having organs, but they do. The first one are stems. All right. This really is the transport system. It obviously connects the leaves to the roots. The second are the leaves. This is the sites of photosynthesis. That's where we'll have, remember, when we're dealing with photosynthesis, we are dealing with chloroplasts. And in the chloroplast, they have that chlorophyll, just as a remember, usually chlorophyll A, right? And then the third are these roots. These help anchor the plant. They can help store food, but very importantly, they're important for water and mineral absorption, all right? And if we think of storing food, think of things like potatoes or beets or carrots, right? That's where a lot, I spelled carrots with 2 T's, whatever, which they can store their energy in that form. So if we look at a more close, so organs were kind of the big picture view. And if we zoom in a little bit, plants also have some tissue types, all right? 3 types of tissue. The first is the dermal layer. This is the outermost layer. This is the red part here. That is shown here in the leaves, the stems, and the roots. It is the outermost layer. It's usually a single cell layer, and it really acts as like the skin of the plant or the cuticle, right? The second, as we go in, is the vascular tissue. This is the transport, right? This, we have those 2 types. We have xylem for water moving up, right? So that would be the xylem. And then we have phloem, which is a 2-way tube where sugars usually go up and down, right? Phloem and xylem and phloem, right? And then the third tissue is all of this tissue in the middle, and that's called ground tissue, right? That makes up the majority of the plant, as you can see here. And it is involved in metabolism, right? So remember, metabolism is where like a lot of the chemical reactions for things besides photosynthesis. We can also get photosynthesis in the ground tissue. That's where all the metabolism is happening. And you can also have some storage and support as well. All right. So if we look at plant growth, we have both plant growth and development. So the growth, again, is when we're increasing mass through mitosis, right? So that is really, remember, that's nuclear division instead of cell division. I'm putting nuclear division here, right? And then we also have development, which is really when we're specializing. We're not just gaining mass, but we're really making things more specialized. So for example, the development of flowers could be a specialized development. All right. And this is all things that you guys know from your experience. So we have annual plants that complete their entire life cycle in 1 year. There are biennial plants that complete their life cycle in 2 years. And then we have perennials, and these live for many, many years. And for example, these are dahlias. And in my grandpa's garden, my grandpa planted dahlias years ago, and we get dahlias coming up every year, and we don't have to do anything. They live for many, many years, right? So that guy, annoying. All right, so indeterminate plant growth. So Plant growth is fundamentally, or can be, depending on the plant, fundamentally different than animal growth. And this is because sometimes there is no termination of growth, right? So determinate growth means that there is an end point. So in humans, there is a determinate amount that you're going to grow, usually determined primarily by genetics and environment, and that's it. You're not going to keep growing. Plants, some kinds of plants at least, the growth is never terminated, right? So if you think of those giant redwoods, they're going to continue to grow and grow and grow, right? And this is due to some embryonic-like tissue called meristem tissue, right? And the meristem tissue is going to be continually going through mitosis. All right. And we have shoot apical meristem and root apical meristem. So you can imagine if only the shoots grew, then you wouldn't have enough support and absorption from the roots. So they both have to grow simultaneously. And if you look at a picture under a microscope of a shoot meristem tissue, here we are going to see this is the apical meristem, and this is the region of lots of increased cell division. So that's where you're going to get a lot of the cell division. And what that's going to do is then provide growth, and this is going to push forward, right? And if we can now look at the root, we have this apical meristem of the root, the ram, if you will. And here we're going to get increased cell division, which is then going to drive the root farther down. All right. So just want to point out that there's two main kinds of growth in terms of plants. We have primary growth, which increases length. This is primarily from those apical meristem tissue in the shoots. So those are the SAM, right? We can also have secondary growth, which increases thickness. So this is still in the kind of SAM, but instead of being apical, meaning at the top, this is lateral on the sides, right? So apical is at the top and the lateral are on the sides. And again, don't get crazy about taking lots and lots and lots of notes on this, because I'm not going to have insane assessments for this, right? When we get to the vascular system, or vascular tissue, we've already touched this, so I'm going to go over it pretty quickly. We have the xylem, which is important for water and minerals, right? Water and minerals. And that goes from the roots up into the shoots. The phloem is a two-way path. It goes in both directions. And this it can do water, but it also moves sugars or foods. So remember, if we have photosynthesis out here on the plants, the photosynthesis is going to make sugar. That sugar is then going to have to travel down into all of these different areas, such as the roots and other parts of the shoots, for the mitochondria to then use it. Right? The translocation of water from the roots up into the shoots is through the xylem, is called transpiration, right? So transpiration, and I'll put it over here just in case you can't see, transpiration. So this, by definition, is the loss of water from the leaves, usually through the stomata. That is the driving force that pulls water from the roots up. And huge amounts of water vapor can be lost through transpiration. Some trees, it's 450 liters a day. So imagine how much they're going to have to be absorbing through those roots. And the forces in the xylem that help move water up are one, well, I've got this kind of acronym called TACT. One, we have transpiration. Again, water loss through the stomata, and this can depend on temperature and humidity. So let's say if we have very high temperature, you're going to get more transpiration, right? If we have very, very low humidity, meaning very, very dry, you are going to increase water evaporation, right? The second force is adhesion. This is attraction of water molecules to the surface. And remember, this is kind of a review from way back at the beginning, but water can have cohesion, meaning they're interacting with each other, or they can have adhesion, where molecules interact to other surfaces like the cell wall, right? Cohesion, right? And what's called tension, or the water column interacting with each other as they're kind of pulling up. So there's a water tension in the column of water due to this transpirational pull. So I really love this image, and I'm pretty sure I've shown you this before. So as we look at transpiration, again, water loss at the leaves, pulling water through up from the roots. This is all driven by water potential. Remember that water potential is given to us through this sign, and it is the, those are the water potential. Why am I blanking here? There's two different kinds of water potential. We have pressure potential and, thank you, solute potential. Sorry about that. So we're really looking at this water potential here. And remember, water always flows down its water potential gradient. And what I mean by that is always towards more negative numbers. All right. So if we look at the water potential of a plant, the soil has 0.3 in the root, xylem is negative 0.3, root xylem negative 0.6. So water is going to flow into them. Then it's going to go into the trunk xylem because that's more negative. Then into the leaves, that's more negative. Then eventually water is going to flow out into the air because the air has a more negative water potential than anything else. So this really drives water down its water potential gradient up the tree. All right. Remember that stomata are the openings on the underside of leaves that is going to let oxygen out and carbon dioxide in. All right. We're also now seeing that in addition to oxygen being lost, we also see water being lost out of those stomata. And the way that these stomata work is that they have these cells called guard cells, and they fill with water when they open. So let me erase those marks and, yep. So what we're going to see is that the cells themselves will have water be put into them when the stomata want to open, and water leaves when they close. So it's kind of like a deflated balloon. Like when the water leaves, they kind of collapse back down on themselves and close. When the water's there, they will get taut and they will open. So again, the trade-off here is that plants need CO2, but they don't want a lot of water loss. So there's always a trade-off in opening and closing these stomata with the guard cells. So again, this is a little bit of review. When we look at water movement at the cellular level, water is always moving down its water potential gradient towards more and more negative numbers. All right. And so what actually happens is that to open stomata, plants, or I'm going to put plant cells will dry, or actually I'm not going to say dry, they will pump salt into the guard cells. What that does is makes that water potential more negative, and then water will flow into the guard cells, opening them. All right. So just as a reminder, if we look at plant cells, plant cells also have this central vacuole. And this is just like a little review because someday there will be a cumulative exam. So when water flows in, You have a turgid plant when water is isotonic or moving both directions, it's flaccid. And then if you're in a hypertonic solution, such as like a salt, put plant in salt water, your cell will become plasmolysed, where the cell membrane peels away from the cell wall. So we'll look at these videos in class, but I want you to remember that plants also have a lot of behaviors. They grow, they specialize, and they also have cool behaviors called phototropism, right? And the reason I want to talk about phototropism very briefly is that this is the first plant hormone that was discovered, drives phototropism, right? So if we look at this experiment, we'll talk about this in class because I want to get kind of more in detail about this particular experiment. So remind me to go over this in class. I want to point out that there are several other kinds of plant hormones. I'm mentioning these because they may show up on an AP test if you're taking them. I won't test you on this unless I give you kind of an experiment that you then have to analyze. All right. So auxins are involved in plant growth through elongation. The gibberellins are in root and fruit growth. The cytokinins stimulate mitosis. That one's an easy one, cytokinesis, mitosis. And then we have the ethylenes, which are involved in ripening and flowering. Right? So this is one of the last things, plant nutrition. So plants are primarily carbohydrates, right? The C, O's, and H's. However, they need other major nutrients in the form of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And then they have a lot of other minor nutrients that you can see down here that the roots help absorb, like magnesium, zinc, copper, calcium, iron, etc. All right, and we'll talk more about nutrient cycling in the next couple things, whatever. It's coming. All right. And then the last but not least, you already know this, mycorrhizae. This is a symbiotic relationship between plant roots and fungi. All right. So if you look at here, this is very critical for plant growth. So here is an experiment where they grew the exact same plant in the exact same environment, one with without mycorrhizae and one with mycorrhizae. So mycorrhizae really helps extend water and nutrient absorption. All right. And you can see that there's kind of two types of mycorrhizae. Some kind of go really into the plant root and others are kind of on the outside. All right. I will stop there. Peace. Ciao. Adios. Goodbye.